The countdown to the Philadelphia Phillies opening days continues to inch closer, and the bats are looking ready down in spring training. And while the level of play on the field is encouraging, there are still some difficult conversations being had behind the scenes. We have some notable updates to get into regarding some key members of this Phillies roster. As we sit in this pretty clear crossroads during this window to compete this era of Phillies baseball, there are some decisions to be made. We got to discuss about the latest on that. Now, before I dive fully into it, do want to remind you guys, make sure you are smashing that subscribe button. At this point in time, just 31.5% of you guys watching these videos have subscribed to us here on Phillies Digest. We're going to be here from start to finish all season breaking down the Phillies action and want as many of you part of the Phillies Digest family as possible. So make sure you hit that button if you have not already. Now, before I dive fully into the contract conversation, do want to highlight some good signs of the season that we got today, March 13th, that Kyle Schwarber and Trey Turner each hit home runs as the Philadelphia Phillies won 16-9 in a slugfest over the visiting Atlanta Braves in spring training action today. Bryson Stott and Max Kepler also hit home runs for the Phillies, while left-hander Christopher Sanchez picked up the win by allowing 1 run on 3 hits with 5 strikeouts over 4 innings. The Phillies had a 9-1 lead after 3 innings and an early stretch that included Turner's home run and the first home run of spring and the first from Schwarber, a 3-run shot in the second. I am particularly encouraged by Max Kepler's performance of late. That left-handed swing does look pretty, man, and he is back to mashing home runs. So we will see when the real action gets here before I judge, but some encouraging signs going on down in spring training. Now, the topic of today that I do want to get into does have to do with the contract and some of the future discussions. And I do want to shout out to John Stolnis of Hittin' Season, who had on Jason Stark of The Athletic, started talking about the concepts and the outlook in these contracts. So to dive into exactly what these two say, we've got a couple parts. And to start off with, he writes, the window for the core of the 2022 to 2025 Phillies will not stay propped open forever. And as is well known by now, there are some important parts of this team that has made 3 straight trips to the postseason that may not be here a year from now. 3 major contributors are playing on the final year of their contracts. JT Realmuto, Kyle Schwarber, and Ranger Suarez can all become free agents after the 2025 season ends with a Phil's World Series title. And while Suarez has spoken at length this spring about wanting to stay in Philadelphia, it is almost a certainty that he will test the market. The Phillies have top pitching prospect Andrew Painter ready to claim a spot in the big league rotation as soon as 2026, while the other 4 starters are all locked in place next season and beyond already. Less certain are the futures of Realmuto and Schwarber. On the most recent edition of my Hittin' Season podcast, The Athletic's Jason Stark indicated the odds are far more likely that Schwarber inks a deal to stick around rather than the Phillies' longtime catcher. Now, to stick on the Ranger conversation for now, I think my love for Ranger and my belief in him as a baseball player sort of clouds my logic in this, and that is why the general manager position is so difficult. You do have to separate those two in regard. Ranger is like my number one guy to root for. I have the utmost confidence for him every time he's in the mound, and even if the stuff doesn't quite bite as hard as a guy like Christopher Sanchez, I'm taking Ranger Suarez 10 times out of 10. Now, I understand all things are not equal in that conversation, and again, I can wholeheartedly acknowledge that Christopher Sanchez continues to look like progress, and I think it might be fair to assess that Ranger is who he is at this point, but who he is a damn good baseball pitcher, and I have a hard time giving up on those guys. Now, granted, we'll see what Jesus Luzardo looks like. That, to me, is probably more the X factor. Luke Arcani, my very own co-host on here, is really high on him. I've seen a lot of smart baseball people really believing that this is a great spot for him to bounce back, but that is more of the competition I have my eye on. And, of course, the Andrew Painter conversation is looming overhead. How soon is he ready? And it does seem all signs are pointing to us seeing him on the mound this year, so we may have a better window to judge how soon he will be ready once he is given that major league look. Now, the Ranger conversation, I think we kind of table until this offseason. It does seem pretty set that he will at least test the market, see what his value is. But I think how the actual pitchers in the rotation, we know we've got in Aaron Nola and Zack Wheeler, but the other guys got to prove themselves. Was it just a splash in the pan for Christopher Sanchez? I don't think that's in the case, but I also can't fully rule it out. Can Jesus Luzardo be the guy that he's hoped to be? We will see what the answer to that. Is Andrew Painter ready? These are all questions that I'm just saying don't have a clear answer at this current time. So I'm not ready to kick Ranger Suarez out the door with that in mind. That is just my 2 cents on the situation, that if we have to have get to the table and do some hard negotiations to bring him back in red pinstripes next year, don't be ashamed of that or upset about that. Keep the door open on Ranger. Don't just be kicking him out of this organization, even though I do get the logic behind that he probably will not be pitching for the Phillies next year. Now, to turn on two of the more controversial figures in this, do want to talk about JT Realmuto and Kyle Schwarber. And it continues on from Jason Stark, quote, "I don't think there's an extension coming for JT," Stark said. "He's a catcher moving into his mid-30s, and my sense is they'll do with him what they did with him last time. If you remember, they let it play out, and he got all the way to free agency, and then they wound up signing him. If he's back next year, I think that's how it'll work." And then Stolness writes, "Realmuto joined the Phillies via trade for top pitching prospect Sixto Sanchez," who sucks, by the way. Sorry to Sixto, but had to put that out there. "Prior to the 2019 season, and over the course of that season," and by the way, Sixto has gained quite a bit of weight, by the way. Just give that a Google look, little Google search if you have some time on your phone. Anyway, over the course of that season and the pandemic-shortened 2020 campaign, Realmuto had an 825 OPS and 5.8 WAR over 192 games. Very good numbers. However, the team did not work out a contract extension with him prior to hitting free agency. There was a real concern he would leave Philadelphia if allowed to hit the open market, but in the end, Realmuto and the Phillies agreed to a 5-year, $115.5 million deal with an AAV of $23.1 million that set a record for catchers. And at the time, I wholeheartedly agreed with this move. And still, looking back on it, now that we have seen this deal age all the way out, don't have a problem with their doing it. And I think one of the factors to keep in mind in this entire conversation, I always invite you guys to look around at the landscape of catcher production around the major league, and it's pretty much underwhelming across the board. Yes, there are still some good catchers out there, but there was a stretch of time where JT Realmuto was pretty legitimately the best catcher in baseball. That is not the case anymore, but I do think there's limited options to actually upgrade from him, and that's where this hard conversation. Now, the slant the Phillies are clearly taking and have set them up for all season or all offseason, kind of lay the groundwork for, is this tactic that if we limit a little bit more wear and tear on JT Realmuto, that we will see a swing back in production at the plate. That if there is not as much strain on him on the day-to-day grind of the Major League Baseball season, that he will perform better as a hitter. Now, to directly acknowledge what we saw from him last year, it was underwhelming. That he had 14 home runs, 47 RBIs, 27 walks, and 101 hits in his 380 at-bats there. He is 33 years old, about to turn 34 next week, actually. So not a guy that we expect, have any more pep in his step by the next time that we see him or throughout the course of the season. Now, granted, I'm a believer in Rafael Marchand. I wouldn't even mind giving Garrett Stubbs a little bit of an opportunity, and it will be interesting to see how they divvy up those opportunities there. But JT's still going to be the primary catcher for this team, and I think the biggest value that he provides as a whole is his management of the pitching staff, of the bullpen. And what he really does need to be here for is that playoff run, even if it isn't him performing as the best version of himself at the plate. It's tough to just quantify the value in a catcher that just can speak to the pitching staff, can calm them down, call a good game, all these things, manage personalities, and the actual pitching ability of these guys is incredibly important. So I have a lot of respect for the way that JT handles his business. He is an Iron Man behind the plate, but I also understand and more lean towards the side of things that it could be time to officially turn the page on a new catcher next year. But I also have no problem with him needing to perform with a contract on the line and there being a little pressure coming into the season. So that is where we're at. Now, to continue on a little bit deeper into the article here, with this mostly in regards to Kyle Schwarber, Stolness writes, "Despite a perceived down season in 2024, Realmuto was still one of the better offensive catchers in the league, with a 751 OPS that was the 8th best among 27 MLB catchers with at least 300 plate appearances, and his 2.0 F4 in just 99 games played ranked 13th. Should he hit free agency, Realmuto would be far and away the best catcher available. Catcher JT Realmuto, Salvador Perez, Jose Trevino, Mitch Garver, Gary Sanchez, Danny Jansen, Tom Murphy, Austin Bones, Jacob Stalling, Christian Bethencourt, Christian Vasquez, Victor Carini, Austin Hedges, and Elias Diaz, I believe. A little bit of small font on my end. But the article continues. Should he leave, the Phils don't have a great backup plan. They could sign an inferior player for less money, swing a trade, or offer the job to a presumed backup catcher, Rafael Marchand, in 2026, at least in a platoon role with a right-handed hitting catcher. Less than ideal. As for Schwarber, Stark thinks the odds are more likely that something gets done with him, although it may not happen before the team breaks camp. Quote, Schwarber is a little different because he's a DH and because of what he means to the team on the field and that group in the field, Stark said. There's definitely mutual interest in extending him. You haven't seen Kyle Schwarber do the Vlad Guerrero Jr. act and say, we don't sign by 10 o'clock on this date, I'm out. He doesn't want to be out, and they don't want him to be out. The sense I get is that it's very hard for both sides to envision a future that doesn't have Kyle Schwarber in it. Schwarber is the team's most accomplished power hitter and the heartbeat of the franchise. It would indeed be difficult to imagine this core without him. And I do wholeheartedly back up. And if it does boil down to one of these, that Kyle Schwarber is the clear answer in my mind, and I believe in the eyes of the Phillies as well. We also got a little further confirmation of this by a report from Matt Gelb, who's always on top of things as it pertains to the Phillies, as he tweeted out or reported that the Phillies have continued to discuss a contract extension for Schwarber, who will be a free agent after the season. He did not seem inclined to set a deadline, so maybe that's something the two sides will continue negotiating. Now, sometimes there's danger or both for either side, for the player or for the team, that they want to take that off the table during the ebbs and flows of the season. Obviously, you're playing for your contract, so there is pressure on the line, and everyone knows what's at stake here. I personally don't see any harm in keeping that door open, and frankly, I think the goal on both sides is to get a deal done. I would guess that the years is probably a larger factor in what the disagreement is here. I would be surprised if there is kind of a dollar figure that the Phillies are barking at that they're uncomfortable with or that type of thing. I'm pretty confident that Kyle Schwarber will remain a long-term part of this Phillies team, and rightfully so. Even if that takes all the way till the next offseason, that is okay. I like that it does seem to be positive that we're hearing quotes about Schwarber wanting to re-sign, wanting to continue to be a part of it, and I would be shocked if that is not a mutual feeling. The fact that they were still having these conversations, they were still getting little nuggets in these reports like that, I think is really encouraging for his future with the team. So ultimately, we're not closer to a solution to this point, but I do think that these outlooks are a bit telling that Schwarber is likely to be back on this Phillies team in the following season, and JT Realmuto, maybe not the case there. So it does feel like there is a chance that we're entering into the final dance with JT Realmuto there. Ultimately, history will tell if that is the right call. We will see what Schwarber's numbers look like if he is moved down the lineup a little bit. I guess that's sort of the value dance that is being done. I think the Phillies could be running a risk by, if you do run him out here this season and he has an incredible year, his RBIs completely spike because he has more hitters in front of him or more runners on the base path when he's at the plate, and all of a sudden you're paying up a couple more million per year. If you're Kyle Schwarber, that works out pretty great in that regard. So I do wonder if that is a part of the conversation as well. But ultimately, the bottom line is a deal just needs to be done, and I am confident that will be the case when push comes to shove. But we are almost at the stretch where baseball is actually going down on the diamond, and cannot wait to get to it. So appreciate you guys for tuning in this video. Do want to hear your thoughts below on which of these players that you would be willing to re-sign, which you would be giving extensions to, and do want to remind you guys one more time to make sure you are subscribing as always. That 65.5% of you guys watching these videos have not subscribed to us here at Phillies Digest just yet. So let's keep this Digest family growing. Drop a like on this video, drop your comments below, and I'll be back talking with you next time. Peace.